Welcome back. This is Chapter 3, Section 2. Today we're going to talk about energy flow. And so all living systems must have an input of energy in order to function. So this is just like you and I. When we wake up in the morning, we have to have an input of energy, that for us being food, in order to function throughout our day, to walk around, move around, etc. Same thing with living systems. So, oops, I guess I forgot to get the pointer here. So same thing for living systems. Living systems must have an input of energy in order to function. Without an input of energy, they cannot function. And so for Earth, the nearest star being the sun is our source of energy. And so the sunlight is the main energy source for life on Earth. It is the source of life on Earth. When we look out into outer space and we want to see if we can find life in the universe, what we do is we look at stars, and then from that try to find planets near that star to sort of investigate whether there's life on other planets. And this is because we know if there's a planet near a star, well, it's getting energy from that star, and therefore there's the potential for life. Some ecosystems and some organisms can obtain energy from a source other than sunlight, however. And so what you see right here is a diamond mine, and these diamond mines go way down into the ground. And we've investigated these diamond mines thinking there would be no life, but in fact we find bacteria and other forms of life that are without any sunlight, but somehow functioning and living. And so the way these organisms are able to survive and function without sunlight is they rely on energy stored in inorganic chemical compounds. We'll talk more about inorganic chemical compounds another time and in class. So these organisms rely on energy stored in these chemical compounds. So no sunlight way down here in the depths of this diamond mine, but they're still able to function on other energy sources. So plants and algae and certain bacteria can capture energy from sun and use that energy to produce food. So when you look at plants, green plants all around you, this is taking energy from the sun and producing usable energy, producing food. This is a picture of cyanobacteria here. This is a lake in New Zealand. So that greenish tint you see to the water is organisms or the cyanobacteria that's taking energy from the sun and producing food. Organisms that produce their own food are called autotrophs. And so autotrophs are able to take a symbol. So the autotrophs use energy from their environment to assemble inorganic compounds into complex organic molecules like carbohydrates. So autotrophs are using energy around them in their environment in order to take that inorganic stuff to make organic molecules, and we'll talk more about that later. And so this is absolutely necessary to make a living tissue and to function. It's to take inorganic compounds and make them into complex organic compounds in order to make living tissue and continue to function. And so autotrophs, so anything that makes its own food is called an autotroph, and we can also call it a producer. So autotroph is equivalent to producer. And so the best known autotrophs harness solar energy through a process known as photosynthesis. We're going to have a full chapter on photosynthesis, and this whole process is the base of life. And so it's very, very important that we understand it. And so we'll go to the next slide because I think it's a better one. So we take light energy from the sun. The plant, the autotroph, takes that light energy and is able to make usable food. So it takes carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from the ground and the atmosphere. And then it uses this light energy in order to put molecules together, such as carbohydrates. And then another byproduct is oxygen, which is good for us. And so photosynthesis occurs in plants and other autotrophs. And so plants are the main autotrophs on land, although they're also in the sea. Algae are the main autotrophs in freshwater ecosystems and in the upper layers of the ocean. And then there's photosynthetic bacteria, and they're in what we call tidal flats and salt marshes and other types of wet environments. And so some autotrophs can produce food in the absence of light, and we call these this process is called chemosynthesis. And so organisms use chemical energy, like in that diamond mine, to produce carbohydrates. So it takes chemical energy in order to form these complex organic molecules called carbohydrates. And this process is called chemosynthesis. So a classic example of chemosynthesis is bacteria that live near a deep sea vent, hydrothermal vent. And so this environment, and this is at the depths of the ocean, there's these little vents, sort of mini volcanoes in the water. They have all sorts of hydrogen sulfide and other sulfur compounds around it. And it's very hot. There's no sunlight. And so how do they survive down here? Well, they use chemical energy in order to form carbohydrates. Okay, and this is called chemosynthesis. And so let's see here. Bacteria represent a large portion of living autotrophs. The fact of the matter is bacteria represent a large portion of all living things on Earth. Much undiscovered, but for sure autotrophs. This is a picture of a hydrothermal vent, and you can see there's no sunlight. This is light just from the flash of the camera. And it's extremely hot down here, and yet life exists, particularly bacteria or things that use the process of chemosynthesis. This is one reason why scientists believe that there's life elsewhere in the universe, is simply because despite these harsh conditions and these harsh chemicals, the high temperature, we see that life forms. And so likely in the universe where there's harsh conditions, life would still be able to exist. So those are all producers. I'm sorry if I didn't indicate that, but you notice all these slides above were producers, things that produce their own food from sunlight or through inorganic chemicals. But we also have another category, and this is called consumers. And so you and I are consumers. Well, we can't harness energy directly from the physical environment. We can't lay out in the sun and get energy. We can't just break down inorganic compounds or put them together in order to get carbohydrates. Instead, we have to just eat carbohydrates and break those down. And so this is what we call organisms that rely on other organisms. Okay, so we rely on other organisms in order to get our energy and our food supply. And what we call this is heterotrophs. This is synonymous with consumers. So here we have a heterotroph eating this giant hamburger, which I'm wondering if he ever finished. So heterotrophs is also called consumers. So there's different types of heterotrophs. Herbivore. So this is things that eat plants, like a rabbit. So a rabbit's an herbivore. So is as well another herbivore is like a koala, eats eucalyptus tree leaves. Carnivores eat animals and only animals. So you're thinking of something like a lion or a wolf. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. And so this would be like a bear or you and I. We eat both plants and animals. Detritivores, they feed on plant and animal remains, so things that are dead, so dead matter, that's what they feed on. And then decomposers like bacteria and fungi, they break down organic matter. And so it can be living or dead, but they break these down. These are quite important. We're going to talk about the importance of each one of these types of organisms. So now we're going to talk about feeding relationships. And feeding relationships are quite important. These networks are the base of ecosystems and very important. These interactions occur, are intact, so these networks are intact. And so these feeding relationships are basically talking about who eats whom, right? And so it's going to be between mainly producers and consumers. I think we're just going to go on to food chain. So food chain is a series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating or being eaten. So really in a food chain, we're talking about the transfer of energy, and we're talking about energy flow. Because everything, the ability to function as a living thing is based on energy flow. And so we have to eat in order to do this or produce it by making it ourselves, which we can't. So this is a food chain. It's linear. It only goes in one direction from algae, something that is a producer can make its own food, to zooplankton, eat the algae, small fish eat the zooplankton, squid eat the small fish, shark eat the squid, right? This is linear. It goes in one direction, and energy is flowing, well, essentially from the sun. So if this was a yellow marker and an actual circle, this is the sun giving energy to the algae, which is then producing its own food, which then will be consumed by this linear interaction. That's energy flow. A food web is much more complex. It's a network of complex interactions. This is called a food web. And this is realistically what happens in ecosystems. And so ecologists, what we talked about last time, are going to be looking at food webs rather than food chains mainly. And so we'll just look at this and describe this. This will be our last slide for now. And so this is in your book. This is a food web, and you can see it's much more complex and dynamic than the food chain. And so let's just understand this a little bit better. If the arrow is going to an organism, that means that this organism that the arrow is pointing at is consuming the other organism. So the heron is eating the fish, right? The fish aren't eating the heron, but rather the heron is eating the fish. Same here. The shrew is being eaten by the marsh hawk. Okay, the arrow is pointing towards the mouth of the marsh hawk, and so that means that the shrew is being eaten, not the other way around, right? The shrew is not eating the marsh hawk. Okay, and we have different levels here. We have producers and decomposers. That's below this line right here. And so these are all producers. That's the base of a food web. They get their energy from the sun. Very important that we keep these organisms intact because that's how we survive. Herbivores are this in between this line here and this line here on this figure. And so you see a mussel and you see a grasshopper. They are eating the producers, right? You see an arrow going from the producer, this grass, to the grasshopper. That means the grasshopper is eating the grass, right? And then above this is our first level carnivores. So above this line and below this line, we have first level carnivores. They're the first consumers. And so the heron's eating the fish. Top level carnivores, this is the top of the food chain, top predators. And so that's above this line. And we only have the marsh hawk, and it's eating the clapper rail. This is only some of the interactions in an ecosystem. There's millions of other interactions in any given ecosystem, but you couldn't possibly fit it in this particular figure or diagram. So this is an important figure and diagram. It's important to understand that the base of all living things is, well, the source of all living things is sunlight, and then producers. So anything you eat is based off of those two things. That's the end. We'll finish up this section in class and discuss it further.